Thank you for joining us today for this advisory council meeting. So the first thing that we're going to do is start off with roll call. So if you are on the advisory council, if you can put your name in the chat so that we can get right into the agenda. Just a reminder of today's agenda, and we talked a little bit about this in our last meeting. The first thing that we're going to talk about are comments that we have received from various different stakeholders. In the spirit of transparency, we wanted to make sure that we were having these discussions with the advisory council. So attached to this email are the 4 letters from stakeholders that we've received so far. I understand that we're going to be receiving some more, which we'll bring to this group to deliberate. And just so folks know, these are the same 4 documents that I sent to the group about a month ago. So I understand some folks didn't have some access, and I was getting some flags that it may be because of your own organization's firewall. So I would just check. With that, because that might have been the issue in some of those cases. But it seems like folks have been able to open the ones that we sent in the email last month. So just want to put that out there. So we did receive 4 different letters and from various different stakeholders. Our intent isn't to go through these line by line. Our intent is really to go through them individually, ask the organization that submitted these comments if there's anything that they want to highlight, and then we would point to the advisory council to see if there's anything in those particular letters that we want to discuss here. So I know, so the letters that we received were from CAA, CBA, AMERIPEN, and AF&PA, the American Forest and Paper Association. I don't know who wanted to go first. Are there any volunteers from those organizations that want to maybe talk about what some of their questions, comments, or concerns might be? And if not, I'll just start with one of the organizations. All right. So it looks like we have a few people that we need to admit as well. So with that being said, let's start with the American Forest and Paper Association. Abigail, she says she's in transit, so she can't speak yet. So let's actually start with maybe AMERIPEN. Is Andy on?
Yeah, I'm on. Can you hear me? Unfortunately, my camera's not working this morning, but just want to make sure you guys can hear me all right.
Yeah.
Okay,
you're all good. So just wanted to thank you for sending these in. I know that you had some pretty detailed comments. Were there any that you wanted to go through in particular?
No, I think we came in from a pretty bulleted perspective. Obviously, referencing that I'm trying to pull the comments up on my side as well, and I've had some technical difficulties this morning. So thanks for putting them on the screen. I think we've suggested some areas that need further definition. There are obviously a couple of areas that need some clarity relative to the timelines. And then I think one of the comments that we've made previously have referenced back to statute in terms of the process that we believe the statute lays out for the development of the performance goals. And so that was one of the larger points that I think we want to reinforce, is that we understand the statute to drive the process for development of performance goals, following obviously the needs assessment being done, the process through the producer responsibility organization, and submission of performance goals in that flow pattern. So that would, I think, would be the biggest point from the comments that we made. Yeah, other than that, I think they're pretty self-explanatory in terms of the elements there. Obviously, alignment around the list and the scoring process used in Colorado in particular will be helpful as we move forward. I know we've made comments in other states like Maine relative to alignment of material categories. Understand that at times that can be a little bit tricky depending upon the nature of understanding of the categories and ability to find full alignment, but the greater alignment that we have between states on the material categories is going to obviously help the ability to comply with the law and have consistent application of fees as much as possible across states. So that's the high level. If folks have specific questions about some of the more detailed elements, this was a collaborative process, and I'm going off of the top of my head on which ones we had sort of most engagement around. Obviously, from a definitional perspective, we certainly believe that the statute was pretty clear in terms of some of the structure that was put in place, and in terms of moving forward, there are some things we think can be clarified. Yeah, I think that's the top line. So I'm happy to jump into any questions that folks have.
Yeah, and just before, I do want to clarify one thing. And I've mentioned this in the past 2 meetings. Our regulations are going to be twofold. This first round of regulations is going to be really focused on the covered materials list and definitions, because many of the definitions are going to dictate whether a producer is in scope or out of scope for their particular covered material. We do have some language on alternative collection programs. We're really the focus for this round of regulations are the covered material list, because we have that critical July 1st date. Things like goals and whatnot, we are not planning on, or even the process for developing those. We're not planning on putting those in this round of regulations, because those are really going to inform the plan, which is in 2028, and that's many years from now. I know it's going to come up quickly, but we just don't have time to design the whole program and get out regulations by July 1st, 2026. So
thanks, brother. That's really helpful from our perspective to understand too.
Yeah, and I know you and others did this as well. Talked about some of those other things that might be more informative for the plan, and we're going to have 2 years to talk about that stuff as well. So, all right, just opening it up to the advisory council, and I do just want to reiterate Eileen's comment. It looks like we are getting some noises from background noises from folks. But just want to open it up to the group. Is there anything after, or is there anything in AMERIPEN's comments that they submitted to the agency that we want to maybe discuss a little bit further? Are there comments, questions, maybe disagreements, maybe things that we can come to consensus on, anything like that? Opening it up to the advisory council members.
Bradley, sorry, maybe I'll add just another element of context because my eyes finally rested on that part of the page. One of the things, and it would be a definitional thing that potentially would be handled in the first rulemaking, would be relative to waste reduction and helping define that. Certainly our understanding and read of the statute is that waste reduction is not source reduction, which is obviously used in California, but not an equivalent term here. So want to stress that we understand that to be reduction of sending material to landfills. and waste within the packaging itself. But wanted to just maybe highlight it. That certainly could probably elicit some response from others, but we don't understand waste reduction to equate directly to source reductions such as California or other places.
All right. Well, thank you for pointing that out. Scott, I think you had a comment.
Yeah. Is this a place where we can ask Andy questions?
Yeah. Go ahead.
No, I think AMERIPEN's letter is very detailed and very specific, and answer, addresses a lot of some of the ambiguity, in words like waste reduction. We tend to agree with AMERIPEN on, if it meant material source reduction, it would speak to material source reduction, and waste reduction is not the same as that. My question is about the food service issue: empty versus filled, when's it in, when's it out, and I guess alignment and harmonization there based on what a couple other states are doing. But I don't want to suggest that completely if that's not the right way to do it. I don't track it as much as I know they do, so I just thought I'd ask Andy to elaborate on the food service, empty food service stuff a little bit.
Yeah, can we bring that up in the comments? That was an element that, let's see here.
It was, well, now I've lost it. Yeah, there was 16 or 17.
Number 5, I think.
Was it number 5?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Obviously, the example here would be like a stack of bowls sold at retail that is in a plastic bag. So yeah, the picnic service or the picnic ware that's sold empty.
Not the clamshells at the to-go clamshell. Okay, got it.
Yeah, no. So yeah, so just to, I think I've got this right. It's to clarify that, if you walk into Safeway and purchase, a number of paper cups and bowls, the packaging around those would be covered, right? So the plastic bag around those or the cardboard box, et cetera, would be covered. And so that was, I think, where we had, obviously, if that's used in a different setting, if that's used, as takeout ware, then that's a different occasion. But if it's sold empty, that's obviously a product versus a package. Obviously, if it comes with packaging around it, the packaging would be covered. But that would be a product.
Okay, thanks.
So just to maybe paraphrase, even though it might be what people would commonly understand as packaging, it is a product in this case, and therefore not packaging under this law. A question I did have is paper products is a little bit broader. What about if it is a paper product?
I think I would defer that to AF&PA in terms of their position on what that might qualify as, because we didn't specifically look at material types when it comes to that. And I should say too, we are a packaging organization, so we tend to not
I see. Okay.
parse as much when it comes to that.
I know Abigail was in transit. Are you able to maybe speak on that? I do know Shoshana. I think Shoshana was on as well.
We are in an elevator and we'll be off in just a second. I don't want to lose signal.
Okay. All right.
It's almost like Andy knows exactly what I'm able to talk. It was really well done.
It is. It's very hard to hear you, Abigail. Just FYI, we're getting a lot of static.
Hi. Okay. Can you guys hear me now? I was on the elevator.
Oh, I see. Cool.
So yes, I was saying perfect timing for exactly when I was worried I would lose signal if I was the one speaking. So yes, the paper products. I mean, I think that's part of our concern, and we do get into that a little bit in our comments, that there is a lack of detail here, but our recommendation is that there are entities such as the Circular Action Alliance that have been defining some of these terms and clarifying on, you know, the phases when things are recyclable. And while we wouldn't necessarily say that any of it is, you know, necessarily perfect yet, consistency with other states such as Oregon, which are using that as a reference point, would probably be helpful in making it doable for especially national organizations.
Yeah, and we just as a general note, we do take the harmonization conversation seriously. So if there's, like when we're going through these, if there's a state that someone feels like is doing it right or is the most directionally correct, we would want to know those. And we've been talking with the states too, but we would want to reach out to those states as well. So is there anything else maybe on this item or in AMERIPEN's letter that as an advisory council that we would want to talk about? Martha?
Yes, hi. I agree with AMERIPEN that we need to define waste reduction, but I just wanted to point out that the statement of legislative intent says that the General Assembly wants to minimize the environmental and human health impacts of packaging, including by reducing the amount of packaging, especially plastic packaging sold in the state, and reducing packaging waste. So those are both in there. Packaging waste would include, it, you know, the more packaging you have, the more waste there will be, but then given that you have packaging, you want to reduce the waste. Both. So we would disagree with that. I don't know if this is the time to raise it, but I didn't want to let that go by. And I really appreciate the comment number 5 about empty containers versus containers with something in them already. And that is confusing to me because maybe I don't understand it, but the fees that are assessed for the PRO are based on about packaging that has been filled. But when you're talking about recycling and stuff, it is empty. And so I was struggling when we were looking at beverage containers to, you know, to take this point number 5 into account, because we had the same problem in drafting the bottle bill. Is a beverage container a full container, or is it after it's been used? So I just wanted to point to that issue as being there, this distinction between packaging that is being sold and the packaging of a product in the definitions. I'm not sure if there's some kind of global way of making that clear.
Peter, you had a comment? And then Scott?
Yeah, I would just say, Martha, typically there's a difference if you're purchasing something off the shelf that is not acting as a package. It's a product. So, you know, if I buy a stack of cups, that's usually the cups are considered a product because the package is around them and they're packaging the actual product, which is the cups. Same would fit for like a barbecue tank. If I'm buying the barbecue tank, there's no product in it. It's a product versus if I buy it with gas in it, and then it's a package. So that's typically the frame that people use. The only other thing I just say on waste reduction is it's included in services that the pro needs to pay for. And I don't know what a waste reduction service is that we would be paying for. So that is one of the difficulties, I think, in that term of what does it mean? Because if the pro has to reimburse, the pro needs to understand what it's reimbursing for.
I would think that this would be more along the lines, if we have a target for waste reduction, that it would include taking into account reduction in packaging and reduction in waste with the packaging that's out there. So it's not, I wasn't really thinking of that as a service. I was thinking
it's just included
as an indicator, as an objective, you know, an outcome objective of this whole process is to reduce it. And then make it more recyclable and so forth, or reusable. That would reduce waste.
Yeah, the issue is just it's included in the definition that we need to reimburse for the services we
Right.
need to reimburse for. So
There are all these interconnected pieces about reimbursement and payments and assessments, and I don't have a complete understanding of how that affects the definition, but we should have a definition that clarifies that there are different avenues that this, and different treatments of this thing that is clear in the regulations.
And before I go to Scott, reimbursements are going to be in version 2.0 of the regulations. So it's definitely something that we're going to have to figure out, but it's not something that we have to figure out now. So but it's helpful to have those comments. Scott, I think you had something.
Thanks. I don't need to. I was just going to agree largely with Peter, try to answer Martha's question the same way. The way we look at it is the fees for producers are based on the product sold in the state, right? Regardless of package size or anything like that, it should be about how much volume of material am I selling in the state? How much toothpaste versus somebody else's toothpaste? How much mouthwash versus somebody. I think when you get to the packaging definitions and things like that, what's more impactful on the system? 1 million chapsticks that get thrown in the small format things that are in there, or one big giant jug of water or something like that. So part of it has to do with what's covered, Martha, and then the rest of the system pays for the recovery and the sorting and the separation of the other things. So I think they're two different, and empty bottles or empty cups or mugs or things that might get filled and then might leave an establishment filled. It's only a product, once it's filled. Otherwise it's not a package to a certain extent, or you don't know how to ascribe that to a producer. Right. So, but clearly the stuff that Andy's talking about, I think in the AMERIPEN comments are tableware or, things like that aren't necessarily a package or defined as a product.
And all good discussion. I'm going to move on to Mario. I think his hand's getting tired.
No, not getting tired. Let me take my hand down. So, I kind of had this, looking at even the survey that I was looking over a couple of days ago, and it talks about primary and secondary packaging, and then looking at that and looking at number 5 here as it relates to grocery stores, there is a level that we call store level service packaging, right? That would be kind of like if you're looking at a bakery. It comes in filled, and then the products leave out of that box, and that's a paper box. And so it's things like that I don't see a real definition of that could be very, very impactful in terms of quantity. You're talking about, bags when you're packaging produce. That is not really clear. And I just wanted to kind of, bring attention to those things to kind of make sure that those things are included in to some part of this that is clear, because in quantity that there's a lot of resources that are used in those areas.
Yeah, thank you. And we'll get into the definitions. But thank you for that comment. I should note that California has a slightly different approach for primary, secondary, and tertiary. But those are all some good discussions that we can have. Is there anything else on AMERIPEN's letter that we want to talk about as an advisory council? All right. Chaz.
I just want to raise one thought, and there's been a lot of talk about harmonization. And I understand the desire and the need for harmonization. But we have to remember that we have 0 results to date from the effectiveness of packaging for EPR. And we won't have results, practically speaking, for a year or two at the earliest. So just because a group of states decide to go one direction, it may turn out to be the wrong direction. So while I definitely understand the desire for harmonization, I don't think it should be an overriding goal. Our goal is to do it the best way possible, and hopefully to learn from pitfalls along the way in states that are moving ahead of us.
Great. Thank you, Chaz. And we have some concurrence from Scott and Martin. All right. Okay. Anything else on the AMERIPEN letter? Okay, moving on. So we have, I think, the American Forest and Paper Association. Did you want to talk about your comments? Is there anything that you wanted to highlight? And then we can open it up to the group for discussion.
Well, first I want to express my appreciation for my colleagues who managed this while I was out on maternity leave. And so some of this, you all might be reading for the first time too. No, I have read it. It was, there's just only so much I'm processing at this stage. But I will note that some of this information is stuff that we have shared on other occasions, and there has been debate about it. The commercial inclusion continues to be a concern, that paper products are the only commodity with commercial use in scope. And I recognize that that's because it's also the only one that's a non-packaging thing that's included in scope. And so that changes how it needs to be discussed. However, it means that there needs to be thought and consideration for how that's going to be managed and handled, since it's the only one. And so there's no way of checking to make sure, it's well, equitable is maybe not the right way of putting it, since it's the only one. But we need to make sure that we're using the right terms for that. And, perhaps making sure it makes sense and that it can be captured effectively, knowing that it's going to be a unique factor for the PRO to have to manage. But there's a lot here, I recognize. So
In your comments, you had this one, or AF&PA had this one, to add in sold or supplied to the consumer or personal non-commercial use, so that would align with the packaging definition. So is the recommendation to take commercial out?
that has been our recommendation. We think that makes more sense, because otherwise you're having to add a whole nother category to be monitored just for one material type. We think that this is a fairly clean way of doing that.
So I actually remember this language being in the third reader in the bill, and then once it came, I can't remember where it was taken out, but the General Assembly voted to take this language out in the final bill. So just that it might be a little bit difficult for the state to add it back in if it's if that wasn't the legislative intent. So I just want to put that out there, but definitely want to have the conversation on what it means for paper products and how that applies to the commercial space.
Well, Well, and maybe if we're not comfortable, if you're not comfortable with having this added at this stage, maybe creating some flexibility where once the process has been underway, or once, you know, data is available related to how this actually works, that could be a clarifying factor so that it doesn't balloon out of control or become something so unwieldy that it becomes a greater administrative or, you know, functional burden than it is something that adds to the goal of the project overall.
Yeah, and again, we're going to be designing the program over the next 2.5 years. So, and that it would definitely be helpful to have those conversations. All right, Tiffany.
Hey, Bria, Bradley, just real quick, if there's anything that deviates from the language that came in during the legislative process, what mechanism are we using to change that language via regs?
Well, so I should note that we aren't changing the language. We are adding on. So we can't take away, we can't make less stringent than what was in the statute, but we can add on and clarify in regulation, and we could further have guidance as well. And I know CAA has been developing guidance packages for the other states for their producers as well, and the education to the producers. So
Thank you.
yeah, and you talked a little bit about the process as well. So when we do drop these regulations, there will be a public comment period. This is not the only time that the advisory council will have to opine on these, and it certainly does not prevent anyone on this call from submitting us comments. Just know that if you submit us comments, we're going to want to be transparent, so we're going to bring these to the advisory council. There's going to be plenty of time and opportunities to provide feedback on these items.
Can I ask one more question on procedure?
Yeah.
Is there a process by which, like, the AG's office or somebody reviews the regs to ensure it aligns with what's the language passed by the General Assembly?
Yeah, we do have a legal review as a part of that.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions or comments on AF&PA's letter?
I'll just note that the end market section is another one that's pretty important to us, making sure that that language, yeah, I think a lot has been said about harmonizing, but end markets, recyclability, those kind of things, making sure, or taking opportunities for Maryland to not have to reinvent the wheel, but also for there to be consistency between states, so the definitions and all can be applied where, you know, efforts have been made before us, I think would be valuable.
So I think Oregon is the furthest along with responsible end markets. I do know that they have a form for those markets to fill out. Is there an appetite to use that or something else, or do there need to be improvements on that? Because we do have responsible end markets in our statute as well, and that's going to be a critical part of this program too.
Yeah, we would support that. We dragged some of the folks there really into the weeds on some of, you know, how, you know, yield and a few other factors come into play specific to paper. And while we're ready and willing to have those conversations again, you know, I think that there is, you know, maybe an opportunity for you guys not to have to learn every detail about that side of the industry necessarily. But more importantly, I think it's that if, and I don't want to speak for Peter by by any means, but if there's an opportunity for the standards or the protocols that CIA is using in some states already in place, if they don't have to do a completely different thing for the same material in a different state, they already have to do so much adjusting between the states. I think that that would be a benefit. And some of these differences are based in a lot of data and resources.
All right, Michael, you have a comment?
Yeah, Brad, mine is what I would call a general comment. I think as we go through some of these recommendations, one thing we need to make sure is that it doesn't conflict with the statute intent, because if it does, there is a problem. So because that will be there should be a distinction between the the intent of the law and the any of the oversight things that we're trying to do. So not just for AF&PA, but for all going forward. So that's one caution I would say. Let's make sure we do not, consider recommendations that are in direct conflict with the statute itself.
And I don't think that, especially in this instance, that we're in conflict. It's more that this is an opportunity where there is a huge amount of wiggle room in how the statute was written. And so the purpose of this advisory board and the purpose of the regulatory agency working on this is to try to figure out those details so that there's as much guidance as possible for the PRO. And so this is an instance where they left room because there's so many different materials under one umbrella. And so we are offering guidance on how it would work for the paper industry in particular.
Okay, so
change statute.
So I'm glad to hear that you agree that we shouldn't dabble into areas that will conflict with the statute. But this is a recommendation you say we should consider. And how would that work for the rules making, which is really some type of oversight that is not clearly what the law says? That's just the concern. I think we need to think about that a little more carefully before we adopt any. And I'm sure, Brad, you have that under your purview as well.
Yeah, happy to have the conversation. I do want to know, in Oregon, we've heard that some of the responsible end markets are thinking about pulling out of the state of Oregon entirely because of this certification, and just wanted to have a conversation on that. Like, is that real? How real is that? And what that would mean for those particular materials and what it means for reimbursements as well. So, yeah.
Is that a question to me?
I guess it's opening it up to the group. Scott?
I'll let Abigail go first, but I'm probably happy to echo.
I think that every producer has the opportunity to decide to a certain extent where their materials are sold. Going through some of these processes in certain states is going to hit a level of burden where they might not want to accept, especially if they're out of the state of Oregon, they might not want to have to accept materials related to Oregon because of how much work it's going to be to process it. I'm not speaking for any of my members individually. I'm speaking to what we have heard in some of these discussions, that the level of burden, not just end markets, but like a whole lot of things that have showed up in some of these programs are, it's so much additional paperwork that companies are having to make serious decisions about. Is the loss of that particular market worth what you have to do to be able to have it in that market?
Right, that's something that we're looking at as well. We don't want this necessarily be so burdensome that healthy recycling markets that are already there pull out of the state. And so we need to think about that. Peter? Or I think Scott wanted to chime in first.
Oh, maybe my hand went down, but I'm happy. I mean, I'll put the same caveat that Abigail said. I'm not speaking for any one particular company, but I've been in many of these discussions and observed the discussions and the debate. And here's a couple things that are clear. The Oregon law and Oregon regulators, not speaking for them either, but paraphrasing, they were very intent on dealing with responsible end markets, because part of the problem that they were trying to respond to was the excess material going overseas and then ending up in the rivers and oceans and things of that nature. So there was a particular focus on responsible end markets, that they wanted to get it beyond where it was just processed to a certain extent for certain materials to where it ended up. But I think that in that effort, they've done it. It was overkill to a certain extent, and they didn't quite get it right on end markets and traceability, and when is it a recyclable product, when is it not a recyclable product. When it still has waste in it, maybe you want to keep tracing it. When it's done and finished and a ready recyclable product, then you can stop at the reclaimer, processor, in our case, beneficiator, because then that material is a recyclable material and it's beneficial. It's going to be used in the way that it needs to be used. Domestic versus foreign is a place to do this, and it is true that there are companies who are considering, is it worth taking a ton of material that originated in Oregon if it comes with all of this extra paperwork? Or I'll just say it's easier not to take a ton from Oregon if I only get an occasional ton from Oregon. Number two, they've had to do interim regs and emergency, not emergency necessary. I mean, they've had to fix this a couple times since it started. And so clearly something was off. The MRFs in Oregon were very concerned about having to shelter all that recyclable material in place, or landfill it, because they didn't have somebody that would take it. I think revisions, this is a classic space where Chaz's admonition is not just to harmonize to the first state that did it, but to get something that works right across all the states. And I think that is an area that is absolutely true for Oregon.
All right. Good conversation. Is there any other comments on AF&PA's letter? If not, we can probably move on to the next one. Okay, next one I'm going to move to is the Consumer Brands Association. Is there anybody who represents CBA on the call? I don't know if they are. So opening it up to the advisory council, is there anyone looking at CBA's comments that we want to discuss and deliberate? Any concerns, questions, clarifications? And CBA's in here, so we might have to get back to them on some of those. Scott?
Sorry, I was ready for this in the last meeting, so I was ready for this. I am concerned with or want at least some discussion around the drugs and things regulated by the FDA under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act and over the counter and things of that nature. Just a blanket exemption for anything in a pharmacy seems a little bit extreme. A lot of that packaging is just plain old polypropylene, and has resin ID codes on it, and sometimes even says recycle me. So, let's just get aligned here with not trying to create a lot of free riders just because it's a class of product.
All right. Anyone else want to chime in on that or any other items? Chaz?
Now, your comment brings up an interesting thought with a lot of over-the-counter drugs. Well, you have two packages. You have both the package containing the pills or what have you, then you have the secondary package containing the first package. And it gets to some of the complexity of this because clearly I understand the concern on the package containing the pills, but does that also apply to the secondary package? And for that matter, the tertiary package that's used to ship those products to a warehouse and probably to the retailer. Where do you draw the line?
There's a difference between an IV bag used in a hospital or something that clearly contains things that need to be have a certain product performance because of the product that's in it versus a bottle that could have vitamins, and the same bottle could have Tylenol, and the same bottle could have over-the-counter strength pain medicine. It's the same package, right? So or it could be, it's essentially can be the same package.
So it might impact its ability to have post-consumer recycled content, but maybe not. But maybe not the ability to be recycled after it's used.
Regardless of what's in this, HDPE number 2. Does it matter whether it's a prescription drug or a Benadryl or a aspirin?
Or in the case of that package, it may fall through the holes that are MRF anyway, because it's so small.
Why it's on my desk, Chaz.
I know, but it's a rabbit hole. We've got to be careful not to run down.
All right. I guess, Peter, how are some of the other states handling this that have similar language? Or how is CAA approaching it?
I think it's different a bit by each state. Some only addresses the primary packaging, so the toothpaste tube or whatever it might be, and some includes the box as well. This has been a difficult one in some ways because you will have products potentially that contain ingredients that are regulated under the FDA. So you will potentially get shampoos that will be potentially exempt here. You will get toothpaste potentially. You will get different products that potentially again, like a shampoo that's got some sort of dandruff control or something like that in it. So it does make it a bit confusing to provide direction on, but it is something we're dealing with in the other states as well.
All right. Any other questions or comments or concerns with CDA's letter? Okay. The next round are going to be comments that we received from CAA. So, Peter, I'll open the floor to you. Is there anything that you want to highlight in here? Things that you want to see going forward, and then we can kind of open it up to the group.
Yeah, I mean, our comments were put together quite some time ago. I mean, more they were just to sort of highlight areas that might be unclear or undefined. So I think it pretty much explains itself, hopefully. But again, and I would say, you know, these are things that potentially don't necessarily need to get dealt with in regulation. That they could be dealt with as things that are defined within the program plan. But we just wanted to provide a snippet of where some of the ambiguity might be.
Okay. So for the advisory council, after taking a look at CAA's comments, is there anything that any one of the advisory council members want to bring up before we move on to our next agenda item? Martha?
Yeah, is there going to be an I really appreciated this list of uncertainties and the definitions, Peter. I'm just wondering, are we going to have time to go over some of these other, discuss some of these other proposed definitions? Are they just not on the current list because they don't have to do with registration, or?
Well, I should note that we did look at these 4 letters beforehand, and I'll just pick out a item right here, like bound books not defined. We took a stab at trying to find bound book. So, and then that was put in the survey that went out to the advisory council. So, so the answer is yes. That was our intent for the last hour, was to kind of talk through some of these and so that we can take those comments into consideration when we're drafting the regs. And then again, once we do have the regs that are dropped, there'll be another opportunity for everyone on the call, not just the advisory council, to provide comments in the public comment part of that process.
Thank you.
So, are there any questions on CAA's comments before we move on to those, the other agenda item? All right. Well, again, thank you for the stakeholders that submitted these comments. I really appreciate it. It makes the process better. And definitely thought the conversation here with the advisory council on these was helpful. As I said before, we did try to take some of these items and incorporate them in definitions or try to define things that weren't there. And we had sent out a survey to just the advisory council, the approved advisory council members. So I have essentially that in this document right here, which will right here. So just wanted to talk through our survey, and then I think Shannon might have some comments as well on this. Shannon, did you?
Yes.
Yeah.
I just wanted to give one quick statement. So in the form that we provided to the advisory council, bound book had beverage container had an error in the form submission, and I wholly apologize. It was my fault. I was trying to make sure that you had something in here. But the description of beverage container had not changed outside of the statutorily described definition, except the inclusion of that pink statement that you can see on the screen right now. So again, I apologize for how it had gone out to the advisory council.
Yeah. So let's start with the definitions first, and then we'll get to the covered materials list. Is there anyone on the advisory council want to maybe talk about a particular definition, things that we may want to consider, things we may want to revise in here? I know there were some, we did receive a good amount of responses to our survey on this. So thank you everyone who did that. Peter?
Yeah, I think we commented on pretty much every single one. So I don't know if I don't really want to waste everyone's time by that, but happy to highlight it if there's some areas specifically. But I think like the first one is, you say collected through traditional curbside services. I mean, as soon as you say traditional, what does traditional mean? What's a non-traditional curbside service?
And we received that comment from multiple folks, just FYI.
Yeah. And my understanding is that alternative collection system needs some kind of an approval, and I might be incorrect in that, but I think you probably want to reference it back to the legislation as well.
Yeah, and Shannon, did you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure that everyone understands that these were the definitions. And so they're terms that are going to be then utilized. Some of the feedback we received was more information associated with this. And we were just defining at the very base what these terms meant. And then we'll go into more information with other regulations as Bradley alluded to. But we just wanted to make sure you understood these are just terms. That's all this is right here.
Yeah,
it doesn't describe program details.
These are not the final definitions that we're putting in regulation. This is why we wanted to have the conversation, but we needed to start somewhere. So Scott, you had a comment?
Oh, no, thanks. Is there more time to fill out the survey? I think, how long? May have missed an email, but that's one question. Number two, on alternative collection, I think I've noted before that there isn't really a definition of community drop-off in the law, and that we may need to do a little bit more work on this. Curbside is curbside. Traditional curbside, I don't know if traditional is the right word, but because it could be, there are still some counties in Maryland that pick up things separately in separate bins at the curb. So,
right.
But I noted that I didn't see in the legislative process, I didn't see a community drop off, which I felt like needed to be fleshed out somewhere. I don't know that it counts as alternative collection, but it's clearly not traditional curbside.
Yeah,
it replaces curbside.
Right. We will be sending this out. So we're happy to take feedback on that. Chaz, you are muted as well.
Have we been sent what we're looking at on the screen?
Yeah, so we did send a survey out to the advisory council members.
No, the survey I've seen. I'm like Scott. I haven't filled it out yet.
No, you haven't been sent this.
Okay, thank you.
This is hopefully just a more it's a form that's getting ready for the regulations.
Okay.
But the survey, it's essentially the same except for the item that
okay.
Anna mentioned where there was a slight change.
Okay.
And
okay,
also the survey did not change any, did not provide any additional, so for example, it did not include the definition of advisory council because there was no change suggested within the legislative, but the statute, sorry.
Right. And we did close the survey down because there might be changes based off of this conversation. But again, we're going to be sending this out, so you'll have essentially what those items were, and if you want to send us feedback on those. But we wanted to use this hour to talk about these. Right,
Brad, that would be helpful because I think some of us simply did not have the time to answer those questions intelligently.
Right.
It was very short notice, and I think we need more time to respond to some of these questions. I'm glad. I really appreciate the reaching out, but if we're going to do our jobs the best we can, I think we need a little more than 2 days notice.
Yeah. Noted. It's a fair point. And I do just want to note that we're bumping up against some timeframes for the rulemaking process, especially if we're trying to get something to CAA by March or April of 2026, because then that will inform their web form essentially in their application for producers. But I should note that the first 3 meetings that we had with the advisory council, we went line by line in the legislation and we asked what needs to be clarified in regulation. So we haven't been sitting on our hands. We've been taking that information from those meetings. And then the last meeting, we did a pretty deep dive in a version of what could be the covered materials list from CAA. So, it's a lot of information coming to us too, and we're trying to digest it as we get it as well, and not wait until the last minute. All right. Are there any other definitions that we want to talk about? We can also go through the pink sections as well. Peter?
Yeah, maybe just like a broad. So there's the addition of a number of definitions like bioplastics that's on the screen. There's void fill. There's multi-material that are defined in it. And I think what the department's trying to do is connect that to the reporting categories. And I'm just not sure that's the right way to do it. So the concern that I think I would raise is that those aren't terms that are in the legislation. Those are probably best dealt with guidance from CA. Guidance allows us, because we know that there are constantly new questions that come up over packaging. You know, what if it has this coating? What if it has that coating? What if it comes in this form? So we already understand that we are adapting our guidance on an ongoing basis. And I think my concern is laying some of these things out in regulation potentially becomes problematic, because if the definition is not right, then you've laid out a specific category that doesn't work, and that forces then the need for the department to be able to, or to have to try to amend the regulation. So the hope is leave that to the guidance for the pro to be able to do, define those broadly, and allow the pro then to amend the guidance as they move forward, as they identify, you know, issues that might come out.
All right. Thank you for that. Is there, we can also move through these individually as well. So we did talk a little bit about alternative collection programs. We got some good feedback on that. Any questions on the bioplastic packaging definition? Martha?
Yeah, it would be helpful if you could just tell us where these come from. You know, the source. It was very difficult to comment on because I had no idea. Is this just a definition used in other states or original research? I don't know if there's some standard in the industry. For those of us who aren't experts, it was difficult to comment on them. For bioplastic packaging, for example.
Yeah. So for like bioplastics, these were types of bioplastics that we were aware of. Some of these definitions we were trying to pull from other sources. Some of them were not from other states. So there's a lot of different sources of and also just discussions internally as well. Peter?
Sorry, and this gets to, like, I think, you know, bioplastics are generally a resin code 7. They're not recyclable. They would get dealt with all other sort of non-recyclable plastics. We don't see any rationale to separate them out. again, like this potentially could run into some issues potentially with compostable products. So I just don't like, yeah, I don't know enough about bioplastics. I will be quite honest with you, but being this specific, I just don't understand the rationale to do it.
All right, thank you for the comment, Mick.
Yeah, I do have a question. So where do we deal with things like potato starch that ultimately look like a film but aren't, and they do meet the European standards for full compostability? I actually have a PLA bag here that I kept for this conversation too. And I also want to double back. We talked about trying to identify best practice from other states, but I think we might want to call out some not best practice. I had a conversation with a European manufacturer who makes potato starch based films, and he was trying to get me to clarify, wrong guy, but trying to get me to clarify some of the marking standards that are coming out of California. And his simple comment was, we'd have to have 10 products for each state to be able to accommodate what's happening or what's being suggested as it relates to labeling and all of the different things that each state are now going off on their own direction. So I love the harmonization comments, but it's becoming a big deal. And we're starting to see and field some questions from suppliers, primarily European suppliers, who are 10 years ahead of a lot of American producers in this regard. And there's a lot of confusion already. And I think my concern, this one was based on compostability and the standards and the certifications. And I would be worried that some things that do have a lot of promise and I believe are in the direction that we want to go will become so complicated that they'll get passed by or not be valued the way I think this group, from what I've listened to, would like them to be. And potato starch based films, for example, are one of those. I don't see it listed here, and maybe it's somewhere else, but that's why I wanted to ask the question.
Yeah, so I think the European system does include, at least in some of them, bioplastics. And just on compostability, we already have definitions in other parts of the law and regulation that talk about what is compostable and whatnot. So if one thing that we were trying to do in those regards was to align to those already existing definitions. If we have a different definition, then it could complicate how some of those already existing programs in the state of Maryland work as well. And so that was also something that we were thinking about when we put these out. Peter?
I was just going to say, so Mick, under what we had proposed under Colorado, you'll have certified compostable category. Mm-hmm. So anything that is anything that meets those definitions would fall under that category. But I think the point is this bioplastics category, the way the definition is written, potentially would apply to compostable, certified compostable, and non-compostable materials. So it creates a challenge in the definition, and the producer wouldn't understand where they're supposed to report.
Got it. That's good feedback. Michael?
Thanks, Brad. So I just want to, listening to all of this, I want to make one clarification that should be noted. One, not all bioplastics are compostable.
Right.
That's one thing we need to be clear about. I'll give you an example. So when you talk about compostability, it has nothing to do with just being a bioplastic. It could be non-bioplastic, okay? But there are so many bioplastics that are not compostable. A good example, if you know the plant bottle that I helped develop at Coca-Cola, that plant bottle is made from a biomaterial. So it is a bioplastic, but it is not compostable. It is, however, recyclable. So I just want to make sure that some of the technical things that we are dealing with that are very clear, right, should not be, there should be no reason to interpret them because they are very clear scientifically.
Right.
Okay?
So one of the other definitions was we do distinguish the bioplastics that are not compostable, and then we do cite to our already exist or it's statute. And unfortunately, we can't change statute. That would have to be a legislative change. But we were taking into consideration.
Good.
I'm going to move on to the next one, bound books. I know we received some comments on this one. Anybody want to opine on that? Abigail?
We're okay with this definition.
Okay.
So I don't know, we did not have time to submit comments, so I don't know who commented on this, but it wasn't paper, but paper is comfortable with this definition of bound book. I think that it encompasses what needs to be, but it's got broad enough language that if there are changes in technology or things in the future, there is wiggle room for adaptations to be made.
All right. Any other comments on these? Peter?
Sorry. I think the only concern we had is like, I'm still not totally clear. Like, what is the difference if I sell a Sudoku book? Is that a magazine, or is that if I sell an activity book, is that a book or a magazine, or is that captured? I don't like, I'm still not clear in the definition really as to sort of what's captured or not. You could have large catalogs that look like a magazine, or have used an affixed adhesive to put them together because they're thick. So my only concern is just, I'm not sure this definition addresses that in a way that allows clarity.
All right. Yeah, thank you for the comment. Appreciate it. We'll definitely take a look at that. Angie?
Regarding this, I just want to say, and I think you guys, MDE kind of means this, you're excluding magazines and pretty much anything coded. Is that kind of what you mean by that? Anything uncoded, any kind of bound book uncoded, goes into that bound book. Is that, maybe that's the clarification.
And it's really anything that would have a protective, a protective cover affixed to it using either adhesives or thread, and but we did exclude magazines from that.
Right. What I'm saying, maybe you need to put clarification of,
Coded.
Because like Peter mentioned, certain catalogs and things of that nature, would that be considered magazines? In my mind, as somebody who sells the stuff, I would consider that more of a magazine, because anything that has coated paper, in a sense, maybe there needs to be a little bit of, and then Peter, that would kind of encompass catalogs and anything with coated paper. You know what I mean?
All right. Cool. Abigail?
Well, and this is where maybe context or where this shows up in the statute is helpful, but I think that it's about whether it's considered a paper product or not, and that's related to its recyclability. And so catalogs, magazines are, there's not like the heavier cover sort of thing that can be a barrier for simple recycling. And I believe that's why it's got that asterisk about excludes magazines. Is that correct? Is that where that's from?
Well, so we did look at the definition in statute. So paper products does not include bound books. So that is a specific exclusion. There's a second part of that definition where it says products that are not accepted by materials recycling. This is that does not include products that are not accepted by material recycling facilities or composting facilities because of unsafe or unsanitary nature of the products. I think that's like if you wrap a fish in paper product, then it might be unsanitary, and you wouldn't necessarily want to send that through.
But yeah.
Yeah. Any other comments? Okay. Moving on to compostable, we did make a reference back to some already existing regulations. Again, we're trying to align with already existing programs. Abigail?
I feel like maybe I'm contractually obligated or something to always say this anytime we talk about compostability, but strongly recommend that it be consistent with BPI standards or ASTM D6400 and D6868. Those are the international standards for compostability. I know that COMAR exists, but that is not necessarily going to have the best practices that would lead to for paper products with a coating. That's the 6868. It's going to have some of that guidance that would be relevant. And I'm not suggesting we change the statute, but you could say, as defined in COMAR, I just worry that there could be things that could maybe be considered compostable under Maryland policy, but actually a composting facility wouldn't want or couldn't take because it doesn't meet the standards. It leaves too much starch behind, or it needs certain additional steps.
So, or other approved department, would that be something to consider? That would take a look at those ASTM standards. I think our statute in some places actually do reference those two ASTM standards as well, but that's more on like labeling and whatnot.
Yeah, I mean, it's another instance of harmonization. That's the standard that's in most EPR
Okay.
that make reference to compostability. Although compostability is, I think, one of the things that is like the least developed of aspects of programs. I could be wrong.
All right. Thank you, Peter.
Probably means I am wrong.
Peter?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I'm just not sure this definition works the way that the term is used throughout the legislation. I mean, you talk about compostable materials, you talked about compostable as a general term, you talk about compostable relating to source separated organics. So I'm a bit worried that it doesn't actually flow and fit. I think I understand what you're doing, but I don't think this definition would work in all circumstances in the way that compostable is used in the legislation. And yeah, it's just compostable materials, and that's how you address it. So anyway, or compostable covered materials, or anyway, something along those lines.
Got it. Thank you. My team is diligently taking notes, and this is recorded too. Martha?
Yes, this is kind of, remember when we were talking about alternate daily cover, when that was recycling, and we solved that problem by saying, for the purposes of this program, this is the definition. And isn't this an opportunity to do something similar for the regulations on the EPR program? And so, for the purposes of this program, the following ASTM whatever standards will be used for the materials, or is this an opportunity to be more specific than COMAR for the purposes of this program? Compost, to answer their point, the points that have been made, it just occurred.
And that may be more of a legal question, so we might have to go to our counsel, but we have that definitely noted.
Yeah.
All right. It's all right. I'm going to move on to covered entity, where we did add some more information on what a publicly owned building was, whether it's owned or operated, or what owned and operated means. And then we did try to take a stab because there are, even here, we have private companies that are in our building as well. So, like, are they in scope? Maybe not. And to just try and take a stab at that. Any comments or questions on covered entity? Peter?
Yeah, I was just gonna, I don't know if it was intended, the public buildings to capture public spaces, but I'm just not sure I understand how a highway could be considered a building, or a park could be considered a building, under the legislation. Like, like a highway, does that mean that we're in charge of a road construction company that's constructing the road, and we're in charge of the barrels of materials that they're managing at that road? Like, I'm just trying to understand what it's dealing with. And then I think I would just be concerned with the last piece. If you're approving every building, that's potentially, like, I'm assuming local governments and state government have vast amounts of or buildings that they're renting part of or a floor of or otherwise. I just think that might be a bit of a nightmare if that's the approach. And I'm not totally sure how pro services a building that might be 20 stories high and you're on one floor. How do we separate that material out?
Right. So what we were, so on the first item, so there's recycling bins at parks, and those are owned or operated by the government. So that was just looking at the definitions that really trying to reimburse state and local governments. And then on the last part right here, we recognize that we, like, even here at MBE, we are in a building with other private entities, and that those other entities aren't a covered entity, that because we don't have commercial or private companies as a part of those, and in terms of like pickup and whatnot. So we're trying to distinguish situations where a government space may be intermixed with other spaces as well. And that if you are in a situation like that, then those other spaces, their costs would not be covered because they are not a covered entity. So as a part of the process for CAA, there may have to be something that does like a mass balance, like this is the proportion that is coming from this entity, from this government entity in that building. Or maybe, and it depends on what the contract is, the government building may actually have an invoice just specifically to them for their recycling services. So there may be some variability around that.
Yeah, I just want to be, like, again, government and state buildings would vary everything from laboratories to other industrial purposes. So, if we're recycling the materials, we have to tell the producers what types of materials are included because we've got to pass that cost on. So you could be in a building which is entirely a private lab except for your one floor of the building. Nothing in that is residential like, except potentially the small amount of materials that are getting generated in your workspace. The materials get picked up by a waste management company, a recycling company. I'm not sure how you allocate costs or the percentage of materials to just your activities. So I think that's the concern I think we're trying to spell out, which is it's not that simple in how we would allocate or assess costs.
Yeah, Scott.
Yeah, I'm sympathetic here on this one. I put in the chat service garages for vehicle maintenance, for salting trucks and stuff like that. That's not right, government building, government operation. Maybe we're going to get at the LPMA oil packaging or something. I don't know, but no, I think there's got to be some sort of rational line here on what's done in the building, right? Are covered products in the building. And I guess this bleeds into the commercial and the paper. But worthy of discussion later, maybe not solving.
I can say that we just put in our order for some paper products yesterday. So, but anyways, yeah, I mean, this is definitely something that needs to be fleshed out. We did want to recognize that there are government spaces that are intermixed with private and leases as well. So, and since it says owned or operated, we thought those, the operated, we thought those were in scope. All right. Moving on to covered materials right here. We did add some additional information to the covered materials definition. I should note, so yeah, just opening it up to the floor. Abigail?
I'm going to blame it on being out for a few months. Where did the labels come from? Is that a new thing? Was that somewhere already? What kind of label are we talking about there? Are we talking about like my, obsessive little stickers that have exactly what's inside of something? Are we talking about an Amazon, quick print? How do you set a fee for a label?
Yeah, so we did have some conversations with some of the other states, and some of the other states, it sounds like they are including labels in scope with theirs. So that was an attempt to try and align with some of them. And we did find that that there was some variability as well within some of the other states too. Peter?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understand this one. I feel like it may create more challenges than solve. So because you specifically labeled out or called out labels again, which are included, I guess the question is, well, you haven't spoken to potentially other attachments. So does that mean only labels are captured? Does that mean hand tags are not captured because you haven't said specifically hand tags? Like I think this may create more questions or issues than it may actually solve.
Kelly?
Yeah, I agree with, I was going to make Peter's point too. With the includes, if it doesn't say, includes but not limited to, it does kind of imply an exclusive list. And I thought that could leave off a lot of things like strapping or other types of label attachments.
Yeah, and that is, and we can also expand on labels in guidance as well, just as a note. And but yeah, the concerns are definitely noted, so we can take those into consideration. Abigail?
I guess, but what do we mean by, like, are we talking about like the glued on piece of paper that's on like a beer bottle? Are we talking about like a shipping label? All of these things, how do you account for that separately from the existing packaging? Isn't that a part of, like, when is it like a part of the packaging? When is it a separate thing? I'm just really confused about what this is and how that works. Like, what other state, I must be clearly out of the loop, but what other state has this? Where did we get this from?
I'm going to move to
I just don't have enough
Shannon.
information to like opine on it.
Shannon, when we were talking with the other states, do you remember which ones?
I'm going to defer to Sarah.
Sorry, it took me a second to get on screen there. Yeah, so I know that Oregon and Colorado both, I believe both include labels, and I think they expand on that, perhaps in guidance or it wasn't addressed in regulation specifically. I believe that's true. But yes, but this was something that I think we had talked about internally. And thought that it was something that I think where we were coming from was we were thinking about something that helps identify products and therefore aids with their transportation and things like that. So this was something that we have talked about other states with, but also something that we had come up with internally before in those conversations.
But with it as a covered material, it would have a fee potentially. Okay.
I was just going to say, typically we deal with this through guidance around how producers need to report. So this type of issue would be dealt with through our reporting guidance. So I don't think any jurisdiction calls out specifically. We just CA deals with it through its guidance materials that it provides to producers to report on how to report.
Yeah, so when we reached out to Oregon and Colorado, it sounded like they included labels in some form or fashion. So we can maybe go back to them on that and get some more clarity on that. Mario?
I guess I'm okay with what you just said, going back to get more clarity on that. Based on the conversation I'm having, it sounds like a mixture between and or labels and logos. I don't know why. Something I think Shannon Abigail just said put me in the mind of identifying a product or packaging. Is that what I heard?
So this the scope for this is packaging and paper products.
Right.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. It just sounds like something different to me. I mean, I got the scope. It just I'm confused. I mean, I'm confused as well about.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. This is something that we can definitely take a look at. I'm going to move on for the sake of time. So we did add some additional items to covered services. Any questions or comments on these? Peter?
Yeah, I was just going to ask about scope. So it doesn't appear to me like litter cleanups are included in the legislation. So I was just confused by this one. Is this actually in scope within the legislation to include this?
Well, so when we were reaching out to some of the counties actually will have, like when they are doing their cleanups, they will have a bag for recyclables and they will have a bag for non-recyclables. So again, this is an attempt to trying to reimburse governments for some of their activities, and if these are packaging or paper products that would otherwise be covered under this, then there might be. And we also want to reimburse governments for the activities. That was an attempt to try and include that. So, but if let's say you're doing a highway cleanup, you're collecting right here. you're sorting into the bag that is for recyclables. Processing could include cleaning as well, because I know some of the MRFs, what you are going to be getting a product that might have some residue on it and whatnot. So at least in terms of those, categories which are covered services, there seems to be a reasonable through line to litter cleanups also.
But that litter may be associated with anything, right? That could be associated with a business that dumps waste in the middle of a field. That could be, I mean, that could be any type of material, right? So it could be, you know, a truck that overturns and you're cleaning up that material. Like, it could be anything, and it could be generated outside of the residential sphere. So I'm just not sure how that line's being drawn.
Well, yeah, thank you for the comment. Just wanted to walk through that, at least some of the things that are collecting, some of the categories that are included under covered services do happen in litter cleanups. Martha?
Yeah, I just had a question about, we're talking about cleaning of stuff that's been littered, which obviously is not, is sometimes impossible to make it recyclable. But what is this also covering? The cleaning of reusable containers? How does this fit in? Because the cleaning part is included here. Is that also a covered service?
Yeah, potentially, because we do talk about reuse in here as well. So that could be something that is covered by this program.
It says cleaning of covered materials to ensure recovery in the form of recycling.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
But it doesn't say, but then it talks later about reuse. So is it also cleaning materials to ensure reuse?
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point. You do have or otherwise managing for reuse right here.
Mm-hmm.
So just because it's not there, but that is a good point.
So Bradley, if that was for reuse, would that include like potentially the propane for a restaurant to put a washing machine in, a dishwasher?
So how have some, I know not all states include reuse or have a focus on reuse. How have some other states tackled that?
This is, I mean, we're really just headed into this with California right now. And Minnesota and Washington are a little further behind right now. So I think it's a question we're asking ourselves around this specific issue of, you know, what are the potential costs around reuse, and who are we applying those fees to?
And so with your conversations with California, how have since it seems like they're the furthest along, how are they approaching it?
It's a bit different, Bradley, because theirs is more of a source reduction approach, and it's I mean, they've got a fund as well, so it's a different application. But I think we would just need to understand, you know, if we're paying for cleaning services of a product, who are we applying that to? Is that getting applied to a reuse cup that's out there? How do we work that? Because we'll need to address those fees.
Right, and so reuse is throughout this entire
correct
legislation. So reuse is definitely in scope for this, and so it sounds like we do need to maybe put some more thought into some of what that looks like. But we definitely want to encourage reuse as we're going forward, kind because in terms of just reduce, reuse, recycle, reuse is before recycling as well.
Totally get that. Again, it's just a question
Right.
of we've got to allocate fees. So we also don't want to set up fees that potentially do the opposite and add additional costs to reusables that potentially price them out of the marketplace.
I see. Okay.
That's a consideration we've got.
Right. Abigail?
Jumping back to the litter cleanup aspect of this, I am in agreement with the reusable discussion, but I think that the litter cleanup where computers are collected and so on, I think that if it's not going to be just anytime litter has to be picked up, but it's when a county does it intentionally or something like that, then that should fit under outreach activities for letter A2. It doesn't need to be separately called out and a thing that is separate and outside of the definition of what covered services means. If that makes sense. Like I think that it's there's a additional nuance to the language being a separate letter B, as opposed to it being a part of the public educational outreach activities somehow.
Got it. Yeah. Thank you for the comment. All right. I'm going to move on. So this was in the exempt material. So we're being a little bit more clear on where exactly this was located, the newsprint definition. We did add an item for exempt material does not mean tertiary packaging associated with the here for exempt materials. So that would be the outermost packaging, and it could also maybe include the packaging that is secondary as well. As in the example that I think Scott gave, you have the pill bottle, and then you maybe have like the paper container that is around the pill bottle too. Any questions on that? Abigail?
Should I save my thoughts on the tertiary definition for when we get to that and just
I mean, you can,
or do we want to get to it where it looks? I think it makes sense in the context of the definitions. I just don't want you to think that I don't have thoughts on the tertiary definition.
Well, to be fair, we have invoked the term tertiary. I do want to maybe get into California's definition of primary, secondary, tertiary. So my understanding of California is primary is the innermost packaging, like touching the product. Secondary is the packaging for display, and tertiary is the packaging for transport. We had a slightly different approach. Primary was the innermost packaging touching the product, and I'm paraphrasing too, just by the way. Tertiary is the outermost packaging, and secondary is anything that is not primary or secondary, as a broad category. So there could be opportunities to align with California, because I think they're the only ones that have defined it at this point. But that was, I mean, we definitely invoked the term tertiary here, so just wanted to talk about the approach that we put forth, and then what California is thinking about as well. Abigail, did you have anything else you wanted to talk through?
Well, I have it. I mean, if we are talking about the secondary and tertiary and all that, I mean, I think that consistency across jurisdictions is helpful. I worry that the definition of tertiary could be potentially overly broad, where there could be an incidental situation of it being primary and tertiary at the same time, or that I guess the tertiary, it just gets into this arena of a whole lot of things, of materials that have not necessarily been made, are made to really withstand major shipping impacts. And
really, for tertiary, we're really only talking about the tertiary that is for personal non-commercial use. So if it's getting to the consumer, or residential at this point. So it might not include some of those other items that we're talking about, like something that never actually gets to the residential space, but is also tertiary packaging.
Except if it's a paper product and it's in a commercial use there.
Right, yeah.
So it does still,
But then,
pallets and everything else.
That's the exact point I was going to mention. Shrink wrap pallets, all those kinds of things.
mm-hmm. Yeah, so I guess since we're asking the advisory council, what would be a proposal then from AF&PA on that?
Well, you could take the commercial out and maybe that whole problem would go away.
Yeah.
You know, it's a unique problem to Maryland, so I'd have to think about how the definition could be better crafted. But I just, because it encompasses commercial too for paper products, and then you've got this really, really broad definition of tertiary, it becomes massive.
Yeah, understood on that. And my team has taken the note as well. All right, moving on. Individual producer responsibility plan. Any questions on that? Martha?
Yeah, I've had the way I read this is that the individual producer plan is the plan that is their plan to adhere to the program of the PRO. And I suggested rewording it. Means a covered materials producer responsibility plan submitted by an individual producer to the department in accordance with the environmental article. Right, they're submitting a separate plan from the PRO plan, right?
It would be, yeah.
So reading this, it wasn't clear to me that it was separate. It almost looked like it was something that was how they intend to comply with the PRO's plan. That's the way I read it.
So here, to comply with the producer responsibility plan individually. Yeah, I think we could, there's some opportunities to clarify that. Scott?
Yeah, I suggested that in the questionnaire.
Yeah, let's just be careful on the individual. The most prominent one that's come through in Colorado is a group that all have the same package, right? LPMA. So it may be an individual class of packaging from several,
right,
unique to several producers.
Yeah, and I think they're wanting to be an alternative collection program, which could also be a little bit different than an individual producer responsibility plan. Yeah. So, yeah, I'm going to move on. So, long-term packaging. This is because we have that exemption for packaging that is intended to use for 5 or more years. I think it's the last exemption. Any questions or concerns with this? Peter?
Yeah, I would just leave this one to guidance. I think it's too complicated. You're going to potentially, again, create some problems, I think, in how you move forward on this one. So, yeah.
I think we would want to understand what those problems might be.
Well, I mean, you know, like even that first category, packaging fabricated from paper only. So you've got card games and board games. I mean, there's lots of other paper packaging that would include things like magic kits or, I don't know, decorations, Christmas decorations. Like there's a whole bunch of materials that are going to potentially fit in all of these categories that, and there's lots of nuance, right? There's lots of nuances in all of the different products that are coming through. You know, a duvet that comes in a, you know, like a little plastic button-up thing. Is that considered long-term? Like, I think there's just so many different examples, and I think locking this definition in a regulation may create some issues over time.
Abigail?
I mean, Peter said it well, but I mean, you're really singling paper out very, very specifically, and then it's just anything from plastic or metal is the next category. So I guess, you know, there's a concern there. And I don't know, glass is completely left out of long-term packaging. I guess nothing can be in there for a long time.
I beg to argue. I've got some tequila in my liquor cabinet that's been there for at least 5 years. So
well done. But you know, there's just so many things that go in cardboard boxes. I mean, just think of all of the documents that are in long-term storage. Think of, you know, yeah, I had Christmas decorations or, you know, craft supplies, you know, memorabilia, so many things that naming really specifically card decks and board games, I just think it creates so many more problems, and you know, just sort of suggests we have no idea what paper does. So concerned.
Yeah. Any other comments on that?
yeah, I agree with Peter. I would leave it as non-specific as possible.
Martha?
I want to make sure that there's a distinction here between, I would call this durable packaging, but to make sure we're clear that the difference between this and reusable packaging that can be used over and over for the long term.
Right. It's something that can be reused over and over. I think it's something that we would want to encourage.
Right.
I need to talk to the keg guys about whether kegs are, you know, can last 5 years or not. I mean, they probably can. Depends.
And just to go back to where this comes from in this exemption, this is packaging. So we're only talking about packaging, not paper products, used for long-term protection or storage of a product that has a lifespan of not less than 5 years, as determined by the department. So as determined by the department, if CAA does come up with guidance on this, and it's not in the plan, we would have to agree with that also. We also did talk about whether a product is marketed to be long-term storage as well. So that is, there could be some incidentals where someone may use like a butter container as a Tupperware container or something like that, but is it marketed that way? So those were some other things that we talked about. We are running a little bit out of time. This sounds like we need to maybe talk about this in our next meeting. And I do just want to highlight that this is, again, it's not the only time for the advisory council to provide comments. You can certainly submit us comments individually. And there will be a full, robust public participation process that we're required to do by law. So, and then we'll make sure that we get these out to people as well, so that you can take a look at them. I do want to stress that we do have some very real time constraints with the regulation development process as well. So we've been trying to take information from our first 4 meetings that we had to develop this package, and I appreciate the comments that we received in those 4 meetings, and then the survey responses and the conversation that we've had here today.
Hey, Brad, should we open it to the public? I know they can send all the input to you, but that might be good before we close.
Yes. So opening it up to the public. Andrew?
Yeah, I just would, to go back to the covered services definition and with regard to litter, that's something that was debated a lot and back and forth throughout the legislative process. I would encourage you to look at the constraints of the legislative language in that space, and would echo some of the concerns that have been raised relative to starting to go beyond the scope here of what's in the legislative language. I know we need to provide additional terms and additional language, but you know, the things that are covered services are pretty explicit, and in the other states, those activities are very explicit. So expanding beyond that is going to begin to draw concerns. And I, you know, just specific to that litter piece, you know, I'll echo what Peter said relative to concerns about that not originating from anything that's covered under the law.
All right. Any other comments from the public? Okay. Well, thank you for the conversation today. I greatly appreciate it. Definitely more to come, and we look forward to everyone's comments when we actually drop these regs. Thank you.